Hi there. So in this video, I want you to actually start by watching Jacob Clifford's video about economies of scale. It's in the YouTube playlist and it's listed up here in the little graphic. Now, after you've watched that, hopefully you can kind of understand what's going on in this video. So if you haven't watched that, pause this video, pause it right now, and then go ahead and open that other one. Okay, so I assume you've watched it. At this point, you should be able to kind of wrap your head around the difference between the short run and the long run. And we know that in the long run, all costs are variable. We know that fixed inputs are not fixed anymore. In the long run, we also know that there's many different combinations of fixed inputs and variable inputs. And so we have this kind of multitude of different possibilities, right? You could have a factory where there's 6 factories or 12 factories or 8, and lots of different combinations of those. And we can graph these theoretical short run combinations as short run ATCs. So the average total cost curves that we've been looking at, those U-shaped curves, those only exist in one immediate short run time period. But in another alternate time period, right, you could have a potentially different combination of inputs, and so you'd have a different ATC. And at any given point, firms are operating on a specific short run ATC. But over time, they could change which one they're on by changing the inputs that they have, and they'd end up with a different ATC. So to illustrate this idea, they create what sometimes is called a planning curve or a long run average total cost curve. Now, I actually made a mistake in the notes here, and it's not by possible minimum ATC. It's a slightly different, it's a related idea that I'll illustrate in a second. But imagine that you have a scenario where you have lots of different quantities of output, right? And then up here, you have like the price, right? Or the cost number, so the dollar value. And we'd say that you start out with this ATC that we'll call ATC 1. And then, right, your firm, maybe they could expand the business, they could get to be a slightly larger business. And if they do that, they might end up with ATC 2. And if they ended up with another one, they'd end up with ATC 3. And what we can kind of do, if we start to imagine that there's actually an infinite number of possible different ATCs in between these, you could kind of create a line that connects these, that does one of those. Now, I've kind of drawn it here like that. And what's actually going on is that that this minimum line that we're kind of connecting the dots with is actually a result of tangencies to the ATCs. And that's a mathematical level that we don't really need to care that much about for this class. But in the future, if you were to do this going forward, it's actually the long run is actually a combination of all of the points where there's a tangent line to all of those points. Now, the ATCs, after a little while, right, imagine that you keep making more ATC 3, ATC 2, ATC 4. You just keep doing this, you'll kind of notice that you can't quite get any lower. And so this line starts to kind of flatten out. And we'll see that here, right, that point there. And then at a certain point, your firm starts to get bigger. ATC 6, ATC 7. And so then this line starts to trend back upwards again. And so this is what we call the long run ATC. It's also called the planning curve. And the reason we call it the planning curve is because a firm could use it to plan how big they want to get. And we actually can divide this long run ATC into different ranges. So the first range is where, we'll kind of just do some dotted lines here. It's where the LRATC is decreasing, right? And so we call this the economies of scale range, right? We also can call this the increasing returns to scale range. And both of these mean the same thing. They mean that if the firm is getting bigger, right, that their average total cost is falling. So that's what that one means, that as the firm gets bigger, the ATC is falling. Now, a really technical definition of it would be that let's say your firm doubles in size, okay, then you would be, say, tripling the amount of output. And that's actually the technical definition of these economies of scale, because it's saying if you double the size of the firm, and I'll kind of just put this down here, right? So imagine that dotted line continues, that you have 2 times the inputs, right? And what does that mean? Well, it means 2 times the cost. But you get, we'd say, 3 times the outputs. And we'd say, therefore, ATC, which outputs total product, right? That's total cost, if I could write, that means ATC is going down. Now, at a certain point, it's going to start to flatten out for a lot of firms. They can't quite squeeze any more cost savings out of getting bigger. And so this is what we call the constant returns to scale. And it's kind of in the name, constant returns to scale, that we are scaling up the size of the business, but we're getting a constant return. And that's where ATC is kind of this flat line, and that would be like 2 times the inputs, and you get 2 times the output. So the ratio is the same. So we'd say, therefore, ATC stays the same, right? That minimum ATC point stays where it's at. Now, at a certain point, you're going to start to try to expand your business. Well, you're going to have to hire new communication folks and coordination problems and all kinds of things. There's all kinds of reasons why, but at a certain point, your business kind of gets so big that that LRATC starts to bend back upwards again. And this is what we call diseconomies of scale range, or we could say decreasing returns to scale, right? And that's kind of listed down here as well. And that would be like saying, well, we doubled the amount of inputs, we doubled the size of the factory, so that means 2 times the cost, right? But maybe you only got 1.5 times the amount of output. And so, you know, that's not very much more total product for doubling it. So that means your ATC starts to go up again. So that's kind of how we can analyze this different idea of planning for things. And I do want to show you that businesses think about this kind of stuff all the time. This is actually from Bayer and Monsanto. They merged a long time, several years ago. They expected, when they merged, approximately 1.5 billion in expected annual synergies. That's a fancy business term that means, you know, that they're going to do some cost savings after year 3, with additional synergies occurring in future years. Synergies come from the cost side due to elimination of overlapping costs due to economies of scale and from sales synergies. Translation: when Monsanto and Bayer merged, the company got way bigger, right? But what this is saying, this is from a Bloomberg business article, is saying they went from, say, ATC 1 to ATC 3. And so they've reduced their average total cost of production. AB InBev, the other company that's here, is a massive beverage manufacturer, global beverage manufacturer, mostly beer and associated alcohol products, but they also are obsessed with pushing that ATC down. So every time they get bigger, they're trying to get into the lower and lower ATCs. Now, some companies have gotten themselves into that upwards, you know, LRATC, and that's a problem. You don't want to be in that range, right? Where you're getting too big and it's too expensive. So many companies get that big, they'll often sell off chunks of their business. So recently, General Electric, GE, realized, oh my gosh, you know, we build locomotives for trains, we build jet engines, we sell light bulbs, we sell toasters and refrigerators. And they were like, we're trying to do too much. So they actually sold off parts of their business, got smaller strategically to try to reduce their average total costs. All right, hopefully this helps you. See you next time.